Think about this. What would you do if the person you loved the most, the father of your child, looked you in the eye and chose someone else? Would you break or would you rise? This story will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and strength. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll believe again in a woman's power to fight back. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because trust me, you won't want to miss this one. The chandeliers inside the Beverly Grand Hotel ballroom glistened like frozen waterfalls, each crystal drop catching the light and throwing it back in 1,000 tiny flashes. The air smelled of roses, imported, white, and costly, the kind of scent you could feel in your throat. Tuxedos and gowns swept across the marble floor, the hushed buzz of old money mixing with the laughter of those desperate to be part of it. And at the center of it all, standing tall at the head table in his perfectly tailored suit, was Ryan Mitchell. Groom, tech mogul, and my ex-husband. He looked every inch the man he always wanted to be. His bride, Vanessa Brooks, sat beside him, draped in a gown that probably cost more than the apartment I used to live in with him. Her hand rested on his arm like she owned him, which, I suppose, she thought she did. The invitations had been sent out weeks ago. Mine arrived in a cream envelope sealed with gold wax, as though the formality could disguise the cruelty. Ryan had invited me, not out of kindness, not out of friendship, but out of spite. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to stand there, alone, and watch him give everything he once promised me to another woman. For 2 nights after receiving it, I couldn't sleep. The memories, the betrayal, the humiliation, every scene played out in my head. Ryan leaving. Ryan filing for divorce. Ryan walking out of our apartment for the last time, not even looking back. I was still trying to rebuild myself, to learn how to breathe without him. And then, this invitation, like a slap in the face. Everyone told me not to go. It's a trap, my friend Lena warned. He just wants to make you feel small. Don't give him the satisfaction. But I wasn't the same woman who had cried on the kitchen floor the night he left. No. I'd been through hell these past 2 years, and I'd survived. More than survived. I had found a new kind of strength, and I had a surprise of my own. So when the big day came, I didn't wear the muted colors he used to prefer on me. I didn't arrive quietly, slipping into the back like an embarrassed guest. No, I stepped through those gilded double doors wearing a gown the color of midnight, with a slit that revealed every ounce of confidence I'd fought to reclaim. And I wasn't alone. On either side of me, gripping my hands with tiny fingers, were my 2-year-old twins, my boys. Ryan's boys. The children he didn't even know existed. The moment I entered, the music faltered for half a beat. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Heads turned. I saw it. The way Ryan's smile faltered, the way his eyes narrowed, struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. Vanessa's perfectly glossed lips curved into something between a smirk and a frown. But I didn't break stride. I walked straight toward the center of the room, every step echoing in my ears. The twins' little shoes tapped against the marble floor. The sound was steady, unshaken, like a drumbeat that announced, "I am not the same woman you discarded." I could feel the heat of the whispers. "Is that, she brought children?" "Wait, are those his?" Ryan's gaze locked on me, hard and sharp, but behind it, I caught a flicker of something else. Recognition, regret, fear. For a second, the image of him from years ago flashed in my mind. The man who had once held me close, swearing he wanted nothing more than to build a family together. Back then, I believed every word. Back then, I didn't know that his definition of love had an expiration date. The wedding photographer, clearly unsure what to do, began snapping pictures. The flashes caught the sparkle of my earrings, the curl of my smile. I met Ryan's eyes across the room and didn't look away. "Hello, Ryan," I said when I was close enough for only him and Vanessa to hear. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "Congratulations, you must be so proud." His jaw tightened. "What is this?" His voice was low, but I could hear the strain in it. He was trying to keep control. "These," I said, glancing down at the boys, "are Liam and Noah, your sons." The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might actually collapse. Vanessa's hand dropped from his arm. The room, though still full of people, felt silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I wasn't here to cause a scene. Not yet. I was here to let him know, on his perfect day in his perfect suit with his perfect bride, that his past wasn't buried. It was standing in front of him, wearing matching little bow ties and holding my hands. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out. I tilted my head, gave him one last polite smile, and then turned toward the buffet table as though I had every right to be there, which of course I did. Because the truth was, Ryan didn't just lose me when he walked out that door 2 years ago. He lost the chance to know his children. And now, on the day he thought he had won it all, I was going to show him exactly what he'd thrown away. The best part? This was only the beginning. And Ryan Mitchell had no idea how much more I had planned for tonight. 2 years earlier, my life looked nothing like it did the night I walked into Ryan Mitchell's wedding. Back then, I was just Emily Carter, 30 years old, in love, and convinced that I had found the man who would stand beside me for the rest of my life. Ryan wasn't born into money. He liked to tell people that story at dinner parties, how he built himself from nothing, how he'd hustled his way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. He left out the part where I was right there beside him, working 2 jobs to keep our tiny apartment running while he interned at tech startups for no pay, insisting it would all pay off one day. We met in the most ordinary way, at a coffee shop near the University of Washington. I spilled my latte all over my notebook, and Ryan, sitting at the next table, handed me a stack of napkins with a smile that could have melted glass. He was charming in that unpolished, boy-next-door way. We talked until the shop closed, and by the time we stepped out into the rain, I knew he would change my life. And he did. For the first 3 years, we were inseparable. He was ambitious, driven, and he made me believe we were building a future together. I believed in him so fiercely that when he said he wanted to quit his steady job to launch his own tech company, I didn't hesitate. I cashed out my small savings, picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, and told him we could live on my income until his venture took off. Those were the years of ramen dinners and thrift store furniture, of laughing on the floor because we couldn't afford a couch yet. It didn't matter. We had each other. When his company finally landed a big investor, it was like watching a dam burst. Money, opportunities, invitations. It all came pouring in at once. We moved into a bigger apartment, bought nicer clothes, attended galas where we felt like imposters. Ryan swore nothing between us would change. I swore I believed him. But success has a way of changing people. And Ryan was no exception. The man who once held my hand under the table at family dinners now kept his phone face down during date nights, his eyes drifting toward anyone who might be useful to him. As hours stretched later, his explanations grew thinner, and the warmth between us cooled into something polite but distant. Then came the day that changed everything. I had just found out I was pregnant. I remember standing in our bathroom, staring at the little blue plus sign, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from joy. We had talked about kids for years, and I thought this was our moment, the piece of the puzzle that would bring us back together. I planned the perfect dinner to tell him, his favorite steak, candlelight, the works. He never came home. At midnight, my phone lit up with a text, "Staying late at the office. Don't wait up." It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the truth came out. I walked into a fundraiser for one of his new projects, without telling him because I wanted to surprise him, and found him at the bar, his arm draped casually over the shoulders of a woman in a dress that screamed expensive and temporary. She was laughing at something he said, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his chest like she'd done it 100 times before. I froze. He saw me before I could back away. There was no guilt in his eyes, no panic, just annoyance. We fought that night, but not about the affair, not really. Ryan had already checked out of our marriage. His words cut deeper than the betrayal. "You're holding me back, Emily. This," he waved between us, "isn't what I want anymore." 2 weeks later, I was alone. I didn't tell him about the baby. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. My pregnancy was hard, morning sickness that lasted all day, endless doctor visits, the constant fear that I wouldn't be enough for this tiny life growing inside me. I picked up freelance design work from home, living on peanut butter sandwiches and stubbornness. When I found out I was carrying twins, I cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming mix of terror and love. My boys, Liam and Noah, were born 6 weeks early. They spent the first month of their lives in the NICU. tiny and fragile, fighting for every breath. I sat beside their incubators, my hands pressed to the glass, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. That I would protect them, that they would never feel unwanted, that they would grow up knowing they were my greatest victory. We made it through that first year on grit, second-hand baby clothes, and the kindness of neighbors. And slowly, I began to rebuild. Not just my life, but myself. I learned how to fix a leaky sink, how to make a week's worth of meals out of $20, how to rock one baby to sleep while the other screamed in my ear. I learned that I could survive anything, even him. Then, one afternoon, while the boys napped, a thick cream-colored envelope landed in my mailbox. My name was written in looping black script. Inside, the gold-embossed words seemed to mock me. You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Ryan Mitchell and Vanessa Brooks. My first instinct was to rip it up, throw it away, and never think about it again. But as I stood there, the paper trembling in my hands, I realized something. This was my chance. Not for revenge, not exactly, but to show him and everyone else who had ever pitied me that I was not broken, that I had built something beautiful without him. I spent the next month preparing, not just choosing a dress or shoes, but deciding exactly how I wanted to walk into that room. I didn't want to hide my boys. I wanted the world to see them, to see us. So, on that February evening, I took their small hands in mine, held my head high, and stepped into the ballroom where Ryan Mitchell was about to marry another woman. And when our eyes met across that crowded room, I knew he finally understood. The life he thought he'd buried had just walked back in, and it was stronger than ever. And the best part? He had no idea what else I had planned for his perfect wedding night. The Beverly Grand Hotel had always been a place where people came to be seen. That night, it was dressed to impress. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers spilling light like waterfalls, gold-trimmed columns reaching toward a ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs, and a floor so polished you could see the reflections of those gliding across it. Every table was draped in ivory linen and crowned with towering arrangements of white roses and orchids. Champagne flowed freely, the soft fizz blending with the hum of a live string quartet in the corner. Waiters in black vests moved like shadows, balancing trays of canapés and crystal flutes. The crowd was a curated mix of money, power, and beauty. CEOs in tailored tuxedos chatted with politicians. Women in glittering gowns leaned close to whisper behind jeweled hands. The air smelled faintly of perfume and ambition, each breath heavy with the scent of wealth. I stood just inside the entrance, Liam and Noah on either side of me, watching the scene unfold. My gown, deep midnight blue, shimmered under the lights. The slit revealed a flash of my leg with each step, the heels giving me just enough height to meet the eyes of anyone who dared to stare. And they were staring. Ryan hadn't seen me yet. He was at the head table, half turned toward Vanessa, one hand resting possessively on the back of her chair. He looked comfortable, like this was his kingdom, and everyone in the room was there to pay tribute. Vanessa, in a gown of pale gold, laughed lightly at something one of the groomsmen said. Her diamonds caught the light, sending tiny rainbows across the tablecloth. I watched them for a moment, letting the sight sink in. This was the life Ryan had chosen. The woman. The table full of powerful friends. The endless champagne and careful smiles. He had traded me and our boys for this picture-perfect scene. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on my son's hands, and began to move through the crowd. Heads turned as we passed. Some guests frowned, their eyes flicking to the twins and then back to me. Others whispered openly. The whispers didn't bother me. They only fueled the steady beat of my heart. A waiter paused mid-step, nearly spilling his tray as he took us in. I offered him a polite smile and kept walking. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a sound that felt louder with each step. I could feel the tension shift in the room, conversations pausing as people tried to place me. When I was halfway to the head table, Ryan's gaze finally found me. His smile froze. His eyes darted from me to the boys, then back again, as though he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Vanessa followed his gaze, her perfect brows lifting slightly before she smoothed her expression into something unreadable. I didn't slow down. By the time I reached the head table, Ryan had risen to his feet. Emily, his voice low but sharp. What are you doing here? I tilted my head, pretending innocence. I was invited, remember? I let my gaze sweep the table. Lovely wedding, by the way. His eyes flicked to Liam and Noah, then back to me. And them? He asked, nodding toward the boys. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Your sons. The words landed like a dropped glass, shattering whatever control Ryan thought he had. A ripple of shock moved through the nearby guests. Vanessa's hand tightened around her champagne flute, the crystal making a faint ping under the pressure. For a moment, I thought Ryan might actually tell me to leave. But then, in that calculating way of his, I saw him remember where he was. Cameras, witnesses, power brokers. If he caused a scene, the story would be all over the society pages by morning. Of course, he said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emily, why don't you and the boys have a seat? I wouldn't want to intrude, I replied, letting my voice carry just enough for the nearest tables to hear. We'll just mingle. I'm sure there are plenty of people here who'd love to meet your family. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I turned away before he could respond and began weaving through the crowd again, stopping occasionally when someone offered a greeting. Most of the faces were familiar from the years I'd spent on Ryan's arm. Board members, investors, people who once treated me like I mattered because I was married to him. Now, they didn't know what to do. Some offered awkward smiles, others glanced at Ryan before daring to speak to me. I played it cool, introducing Liam and Noah like any proud mother would, watching the flicker of confusion cross their faces as they did the math. The twins, blissfully unaware of the tension, clung to me and stared wide-eyed at the grand room. Liam pointed at the cake, a towering 5-tier masterpiece decorated with sugar flowers and gold leaf. "Mama, can we have some?" he whispered. "Maybe later," I said, smoothing his hair. Near the center of the room, I caught sight of the photographer again. He was watching us closely, camera at the ready. I turned slightly, letting the light catch my earrings, my gown, the boys' matching bow ties. The flash popped, and I knew that somewhere, a photo was being taken that would make its way into the society columns by tomorrow. Ryan's perfect wedding was already shifting. The room's attention, once firmly on him and Vanessa, was now scattering, curiosity pulling eyes toward us. I could feel it, the beginning of the unraveling. At one point, I found myself standing near the dessert table, where a cluster of women in couture gowns were gossiping over champagne. They fell silent as I approached, their eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Emily Carter, isn't it?" one finally said, her voice sugary sweet. "It's Mitchell," I corrected with a smile. "At least it used to be." I glanced toward the head table, where Ryan was watching me like a man waiting for a storm to break. One of the women leaned in. "And these are?" "My sons," I said simply. "Ryan's sons." The collective gasp was everything I'd hoped for. By the time the first course was served, I had already spoken to half the room. Each conversation planted a seed, a whispered question, a glance toward the groom. Ryan might have thought tonight was his stage, but I was rewriting the script. And deep down, I knew this was only the first crack in the perfect image he'd worked so hard to build. Ryan Mitchell had always been good at playing the part. Even before the money, before the tailored suits and the private jets, he knew how to be whoever the room needed him to be. In college, he was the charming underdog, every professor's favorite student, every girl's harmless crush. In business, he became the ruthless closer, polished, confident, never showing a crack in the armor. But beneath all that shine, I'd seen the man he really was. It was there in the way he took credit for ideas that weren't his, in how he calculated every gesture for maximum benefit. Ryan didn't just want success, he wanted to win. And in his mind, winning meant someone else had to lose. For years, I ignored that side of him, telling myself it was ambition, that it was part of what made him so driven. But watching him now, sitting beside his new wife at the head table, I realized something. Ryan wasn't just ambitious anymore. He was entitled. He believed he deserved everything he had, and more, without ever considering the cost to anyone else. Vanessa Brooks was the perfect match for that part of him. She came from old money, the kind that didn't just open doors but owned the buildings those doors were attached to. Her father was a real estate magnate, her mother a former model who now spent her days hosting luncheons for causes she barely understood. Vanessa had been raised in a world where beauty was a currency, and influence was inherited like jewelry. When Ryan met her at an investors' gala, it was like two puzzle pieces clicking together. She brought the connections he craved, and he brought the charisma she could flaunt in front of her friends. Their relationship was transactional from the start, but they wore it like a crown, pretending it was love. I'd seen her type before. Perfectly styled hair, designer gowns, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She wasn't cruel in the way some women are, loud, obvious, but in the subtle, surgical way of someone who could cut you to pieces without raising her voice. From what I'd heard, Vanessa had wasted no time after Ryan and I divorced. Within 6 months, she was on his arm at charity events, slipping into the life I had helped build for him. She redecorated his penthouse, replacing the warm, lived-in touches I'd chosen with cold marble and chrome. She introduced him to her family's inner circle, securing deals that expanded his company overnight. And now, here they were, parading their union in front of the city's elite. From my place across the room, I studied them. Ryan leaned toward her as if she were the only person worth speaking to, his hand occasionally brushing hers in a show of affection that looked rehearsed. Vanessa laughed at all the right moments, her gaze sweeping the crowd to ensure every important guest saw just how happy they were. It would have been flawless if I hadn't walked in. I saw it in the way Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me whenever she thought no one was looking. She didn't like surprises, and I was the biggest surprise of the night. She might not have known about the twins until this evening, but she knew exactly who I was. In her world, ex-wives were supposed to disappear quietly, leaving no trace except maybe a tabloid headline or two. I wasn't supposed to stand in the same room, let alone steal the spotlight. Ryan, for his part, was holding it together, barely. His smile was a shade too tight, his eyes a little too sharp when they landed on me. He was calculating, always calculating, trying to decide how to contain the damage. At one point, as the main course was being served, I watched him excuse himself from the table. He crossed the room with the same confident stride I used to find magnetic. Now, it just looked like arrogance. "Emily," he said when he reached me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "What do you think you're doing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Enjoying the party. I told you, I was invited." "You brought them," he said, glancing down at Liam and Noah, who were busy eating strawberries from the dessert table. "They're your children, Ryan. Did you expect me to leave them at home while their father got married?" He inhaled sharply, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "We'll talk later." "I'm sure we will," I said, letting the words hang between us. He started to turn away, then hesitated. "Don't make a scene," I smiled sweetly. "Why would I do that? This is your big day." As he walked back to Vanessa, I caught the faintest flicker of something in his expression. Not fear exactly, but the realization that he no longer controlled the narrative. For Ryan, that was worse than fear. Vanessa leaned toward him as he sat, her hand on his arm, her lips moving in a question. He gave a brief answer, his eyes cutting toward me again. I could almost hear her thoughts. Who is she to walk in here like she belongs? And that was the thing. I did belong. More than she ever would. I had been there when Ryan was nothing, when his suits came off the rack and his biggest deal was convincing our landlord to let us pay rent a week late. I had earned my place in his story, even if he had tried to erase me. Now, as the music swelled and the waiters cleared plates, I watched them prepare for the next phase of the evening, the toasts. One by one, Ryan's groomsmen and Vanessa's bridesmaids would stand to praise them, spinning stories of romance and destiny. The room would laugh in all the right places, toast with champagne, and nod approvingly. At least that was the plan. But I had plans of my own. And as I stood there watching the happy couple smile for the crowd, I knew exactly when and how I was going to make my move. Because Ryan Mitchell wasn't the only one who could control a room. The clinking of silverware against crystal rang out as the MC tapped his microphone. The chatter faded, replaced by a polite hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "it's time to hear from those who know our happy couple best. Please join me in raising a glass for the wedding toasts." All eyes shifted to the front of the room. Ryan sat tall beside Vanessa, his smile rehearsed to perfection, his arm resting casually along the back of her chair. From across the room, I could see the faint tension in his jaw, the barely there crease between his brows. He was trying to act as if my arrival hadn't rattled him, but I knew better. The first groomsman, a tall, sandy-haired man named Charles, stood with a champagne flute in hand. "Ryan," he said warmly, "you've always been the kind of guy who sees what he wants and goes after it without hesitation. And Vanessa, you've brought out a softer side in him that I think we all can appreciate." The crowd chuckled. I didn't. I stood quietly near the back, Liam and Noah on either side of me, their little bow ties slightly askew from sneaking bites of dessert. My mind was calm, steady. I wasn't here to scream or throw a drink. That would be too easy for Ryan to dismiss. I wanted precision. 2 more toasts followed. Vanessa's maid of honor, delivering a syrupy speech about fairy tale love, and Ryan's younger brother offering a quick, light-hearted roast. With each passing minute, I could feel the room's attention start to drift back into the safe bubble Ryan had created. That was when I moved. I stepped forward, weaving through the tables until I reached the open space near the head table. I could feel the ripple of curiosity as guests turned to watch me. A few raised their eyebrows, others glanced at Ryan for some cue on how to react. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear but polite. "I know I'm not on the schedule for speeches, but I'd like to say a few words." The MC looked uncertain, glancing toward Ryan, who froze for half a second before forcing a tight smile. "Of course," Ryan said through clenched teeth. "Everyone, this is Emily, my ex-wife." The word hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. I could hear the whispers ripple like a tide. I turned to face the crowd, my hands resting lightly on Liam's and Noah's shoulders. "Thank you," I said. "I'll keep this short." I took a breath, letting my eyes sweep the room. I met Ryan when neither of us had much. We built a life together from scratch. I believed in him when his biggest asset was a beat-up laptop and an idea. And when he succeeded, I was proud. Not because of what it gave us, but because I thought it meant we'd made it. Together. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ryan's smile had vanished. "But life doesn't always go the way you plan," I continued. "Sometimes the person you thought would hold your hand for the rest of your life lets go. Sometimes they walk away without looking back. And you have to decide whether you'll fall apart or stand back up." I could feel my voice tightening, but I kept it steady. 2 years ago, Ryan left. He didn't just leave me, he left more than he realized. I glanced down at my boys. "Ryan, meet Liam and Noah, your sons." The room erupted, not in noise exactly, but in energy. Gasps, murmurs, the scrape of a chair leg against the floor. Cameras lifted discreetly, guests trying to capture the moment without being obvious. Ryan's face drained of color, and Vanessa's hand, still holding her champagne flute, trembled just enough to send a faint ripple through the liquid. "I didn't come here tonight to ruin your wedding," I said, my gaze steady on Ryan. "I came to show you and everyone else that I didn't disappear, that I've built something stronger than what you threw away, and that your sons are growing up loved, safe, and proud of who they are." Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Emily, that's enough." "Is it?" I asked softly, tilting my head. "Because I think the truth deserves more than silence." The MC stepped forward, clearly eager to regain control, but the damage was done. The room's energy had shifted entirely. All the carefully curated perfection of the evening had cracked wide open. For a long moment, Ryan and I just stared at each other. It was like the air between us had solidified, thick with everything unsaid: regret, anger, pride, pain. Then, without another word, I stepped back, guiding Liam and Noah toward the edge of the room. I didn't need to say more. The whispers would do the rest. As I reached the far wall, I caught sight of Vanessa leaning in toward Ryan, her expression icy and controlled. Her lips moved quickly, her gaze flicking toward me and the boys. Ryan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on his untouched champagne. I knew I'd won the first round. But the night wasn't over, and something in Vanessa's expression told me she wasn't going to let this pass quietly, which meant things were about to get even more interesting. The moment I stepped away from the head table, the adrenaline that had kept me standing began to drain from my body. My hands trembled slightly as I guided Liam and Noah toward the quieter end of the ballroom. The music had resumed, the string quartet playing something soft and polite, but the room didn't feel the same. It was tighter now, charged with whispers that seemed to follow me like shadows. I could feel eyes on me from every angle, some curious, some pitying, and a few downright hostile. I caught sight of one of Vanessa's bridesmaids whispering furiously into her phone, her gaze darting toward me before she disappeared into the hallway. I found a small alcove near the bar, half hidden behind a tall arrangement of orchids. Setting my clutch on the table, I crouched to straighten Liam's bow tie. "You boys doing okay?" I asked, forcing a smile. Liam nodded solemnly. Noah, on the other hand, stuck a strawberry in his mouth and grinned. "This party's weird," he said around the fruit. "Yeah," I murmured, brushing his hair back. "It is." From my spot, I could see Ryan still at the head table. His shoulders were tight, his hand gripping the edge of the tablecloth as Vanessa leaned in, speaking low and fast. She wasn't smiling now. She kept glancing toward me, her eyes narrowing each time they landed on my face. That was when the first doubt crept in. What if I'd made a mistake? What if showing up here had only given them ammunition to paint me as unstable, vindictive? My chest tightened, the earlier confidence starting to fray at the edges. I sank into one of the empty chairs in the alcove, my boys climbing onto my lap, one on each side. I held them close, their small weight grounding me. This was why I had come. Not to humiliate Ryan, but to make sure the world knew my children existed, that they had a right to be acknowledged. Still, the reality of the situation pressed on me. I was standing in the middle of their world, Ryan's and Vanessa's, a world with rules I'd long been pushed out of. Money, influence, networks of people who would smile to your face and destroy you behind the scenes. I had no idea what Vanessa was saying to him right now, but I knew enough to be certain it wasn't good for me. 10 minutes later, a waiter appeared at my elbow, his smile tight. "Miss Carter?" "The bride would like a word, in private." I glanced at my boys. "Not without them." His smile didn't waver, but his voice cooled. "She insists it's an adult conversation." I hesitated, then shook my head. "Then she can have it without me." The waiter inclined his head and retreated, but I could feel the shift in the air. A message had been sent, and I just sent one back. That's when Lena found me. My oldest friend, who'd been invited to the wedding through work connections, slipped into the alcove with a look that said she'd run here. "What did you do?" she whispered, half in awe, half in panic. I gave a humorless laugh. "Told the truth." She perched on the edge of the chair across from me. "Emily, the whole room's talking about you. Ryan looks like he swallowed glass, and Vanessa." She trailed off, shaking her head. "She's not just mad, she's calculating." "I know," I said quietly. Lena leaned forward. "Listen to me. She's got reach, Emily. Her family has more pull than you realize. If she decides to come after you, legally, socially, you need to be ready." The words settled like stones in my stomach. For the first time all evening, I felt genuinely small. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I knew the kind of world they operated in. It wasn't about truth or fairness, it was about power. And I was on their turf. I excused myself to take the boys to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. In the mirror, under the harsh fluorescent lights, my reflection looked different. The makeup was still flawless, the gown still perfect, but my eyes, they looked tired, older. I splashed some water on my wrists, trying to steady my heartbeat. Liam tugged at my sleeve. "Mama, can we go home now?" I knelt to meet his gaze. "Not yet, baby. We'll go soon." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if leaving was the right move. If I walked out now, they'd win the narrative. If I stayed, I risked giving them more opportunities to twist it. When we returned to the ballroom, the energy had shifted again. People weren't looking at me quite as openly, but I could sense it, small pockets of conversation breaking off whenever I passed. At the far end, Vanessa stood with her parents and a man I recognized as one of the city's top attorneys. Her eyes flicked toward me, her lips curving into a slow, deliberate smile. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile you give someone right before you move your chess piece into place. I guided the boys to a table near the exit, my mind churning. I thought about the years Ryan and I had spent together, the sacrifices I'd made, the nights I'd stayed up editing his business proposals while he slept. I thought about the months after he left, when I'd been too tired to cry and too stubborn to quit. And now, here I was on the edge of being pulled back into his orbit, but this time as the enemy. For the first time since walking into the ballroom, I felt the weight of it all pressing down. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. I wanted to believe I could stand in this room and not flinch, but I wasn't sure anymore. Lena returned, slipping into the seat beside me. "She's planning something," she murmured. "I don't know what, but be careful." I nodded, my gaze fixed on Vanessa across the room. She was still smiling that same cold smile. In that moment, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about me showing up. This was about control. Ryan had lost it, and Vanessa was going to do whatever it took to get it back, for both of them. I held my boys a little tighter. Whatever was coming, I'd face it. But right then, in the middle of all that glitter and champagne, I felt the smallest I had in a long, long time. And that's when I knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. The ballroom glittered on the surface, but underneath the atmosphere had curdled. I could feel it in the way conversations quieted when I passed, in the side glances that followed me like spotlights. Vanessa was no longer at Ryan's side. She was moving between small clusters of guests, her voice low, her posture immaculate. She was working the room like a queen securing her pawns. Lena leaned closer. "Emily, I know that look. She's setting you up for something." I didn't answer right away, because what Lena didn't know, what no one here knew, was that I hadn't come to this wedding without a plan. 2 years of raising twins alone had taught me more than resilience. It had taught me how to prepare, how to anticipate the next move before it came. And in the weeks leading up to this night, I'd done more than pick a dress and a pair of heels. I had gathered proof. It had started innocently enough. One afternoon, while sorting through old files for tax purposes, I came across a hard drive Ryan had left behind when he moved out. At first I considered throwing it away. It was his property after all, but something in me hesitated. I plugged it in. What I found wasn't just personal photos or old business drafts. It was records, contracts, emails, and financial statements, and buried in one encrypted folder was a series of documents that made my stomach drop. They were agreements Ryan had made with a foreign investor shortly before we separated. Agreements that weren't just shady, they were potentially illegal. At the time, I didn't know what to do with them. I was a single mom trying to keep my head above water, not a whistleblower. But as the months passed and I pieced together more, I realized those documents were insurance. Insurance I hoped I'd never have to use, until tonight. I watched as Vanessa finally made her way back to the head table, slipping into her seat beside Ryan. She leaned in, her manicured fingers brushing his arm as she spoke. His eyes narrowed, his gaze cutting toward me again. I took a slow sip of water, my mind sharpening. If they wanted a power play, I could give them one. When the MC announced that the dance floor was open, the lights dimmed slightly, and couples began to drift toward the center. The string quartet shifted into a softer, more romantic tune. It was the perfect cover. I stood, motioning for Lena to watch the boys. "I'll be right back," I told her. Crossing the floor, I stopped just short of the head table. "Ryan," I said quietly, leaning in so only he and Vanessa could hear, "we need to talk." Vanessa gave me a smile that could cut glass. "I think we've talked enough for one night." "Not about this," I said, reaching into my clutch. I pulled out a slim, black USB drive and set it on the white tablecloth between them. Ryan's eyes locked on it. His face didn't change, but I saw it. The flicker of recognition, the shadow of panic. "What is that?" Vanessa asked, glancing between us. "Something you'll want to see before you decide how this evening ends," I replied evenly. "It's a copy of some files I found in Ryan's old things. Financial files, agreements that, let's just say, wouldn't look very good if they ended up in the wrong hands." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." I smiled faintly. "Am I? You remember the Tanaka contracts, don't you?" That got him. He didn't move, but his eyes went cold, calculating. Vanessa looked at him sharply. "What's she talking about?" Ryan didn't answer. I leaned in closer. "I'm not here to destroy you, Ryan, but if you or your wife try to smear me, take legal action against me, or pretend my boys don't exist, these files will find their way to every business journalist in the country by Monday morning." Vanessa's gaze shifted between us, the pieces falling into place. She opened her mouth, but Ryan cut her off with a curt, "Not here." I straightened, my voice calm but firm. "You wanted me here to humiliate me. I came here to remind you that I'm not the same woman you left. I have nothing to lose, Ryan. But you have everything. I left them there, the USB still sitting on the table like a loaded gun. Back at my corner table, Lena's eyes were wide. What did you just do? Even the playing field, I said, my voice steady. From across the room, I watched Vanessa lean in close to Ryan, her lips moving fast, her eyes darting toward me. Ryan didn't look at her. He was staring at the USB drive, his expression unreadable. The music played on, couples spinning slowly under the chandeliers, but the real dance was happening between us. I'd just made my move, and now I was waiting to see how they'd counter. I reached for my sons, pulling them close. "Mama's got you," I whispered, "always." Because no matter how this night ended, I had shifted the balance, and for the first time since walking into that ballroom, I knew Ryan Mitchell wasn't holding all the cards anymore. The shift happened slowly at first, like the tide turning. The moment I left that USB drive on Ryan and Vanessa's table, I could feel the weight on my chest begin to lift. For months, years even, I'd been the one on the defensive, reacting to whatever life threw at me. But now I was in control. I didn't rush back to my corner table. I walked through the ballroom like I owned it, my gown swaying around my legs, my chin high. The same people who had whispered about me an hour ago now watched me with a different kind of curiosity, their eyes following every step. I didn't need to know exactly what they were thinking. The change in their faces was enough. Lena caught my arm as I passed. "Emily, what just happened? You're walking like you just signed a $1 million deal." I smiled. Let's just say I reminded Ryan that I'm not someone he can erase. I glanced across the room to see Ryan still seated at the head table, his body turned slightly away from Vanessa. She was talking, no, hissing, into his ear, but his attention kept straying to the USB drive resting on the table between them. He looked like a man trying to calculate how to play 3 different games at once and win them all. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I took a moment to look at myself in the mirrored wall near the dance floor. The woman staring back at me wasn't the version of Emily who had cried herself to sleep in a 1-bedroom apartment 2 years ago. She wasn't the one who had wondered if she would ever feel whole again. This woman was sharper, stronger. Her eyes held a calm that came from knowing her own worth. I thought about the last few years. The nights I'd worked until dawn to meet deadlines, the mornings I'd packed lunches for the twins while still running on no sleep, the battles I'd fought quietly in doctors' offices and grocery store aisles. Those things had changed me more than any betrayal ever could. Now, I wanted the whole room to see that change. The band shifted into a more upbeat number, and couples began to flood the dance floor. I didn't wait for someone to ask me to dance. I scooped up Noah and spun him around, his laughter ringing out over the music. Liam clapped his hands and joined us, and for a few minutes, we were just a mother and her boys having fun under the glittering lights. People noticed. I saw the way a few of Vanessa's friends watched us, their expressions softening despite themselves. It was impossible to look at Liam and Noah and not feel something. They were pure joy, pure life, and they were mine. Eventually, the song ended, and I carried the boys back to our table, my cheeks flushed from laughing. I caught Ryan's eyes as I passed the head table, and for once, he was the one looking unsettled. Vanessa, however, was composed. Too composed. That cool, calculated smile was back on her face, the one that said she was already plotting her next move. I met her gaze head-on and gave her a polite nod. I wasn't here to fight in the shadows anymore. When I sat down, Lena leaned in. "You're glowing. Whatever you did, it's working." "It's not just what I did," I said softly. "It's what I finally stopped doing. I stopped letting them define me." I could almost feel the truth of it settling in my bones. For so long, I had measured myself against what Ryan had taken from me. But in that moment, I realized something. He hadn't taken my strength, my grit, or my ability to rebuild. If anything, he had sharpened them. As dessert was served, I decided to take one last pass through the room. Not to stir trouble, at least not directly, but to make sure my presence lingered in every corner. I greeted old acquaintances, reintroduced myself to people I hadn't seen since before the divorce, and let them meet my boys. With each handshake and each polite smile, I could feel the narrative shifting. This wasn't just the story of an ex-wife showing up to her ex-husband's wedding. This was the story of a woman who had been knocked down and stood back up taller than before. By the time I returned to my table, the room felt different to me. The chandeliers still sparkled, the music still floated through the air, but I no longer felt like an intruder. I felt like someone who had walked into the lion's den and realized the lions weren't as dangerous as they seemed. Liam leaned against my arm, yawning. "Mama, can we go home soon?" "Soon," I promised, brushing his hair back. But not before the final act, because I wasn't leaving this place quietly. I could feel it building. The moment when I would step fully into the light, not as Ryan's ex-wife, but as Emily Carter, the woman who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. And when that moment came, everyone in this room would see me for exactly who I was. It was nearly time to leave. Liam was leaning into my side, his small hand tangled in the fabric of my gown, while Noah fought to keep his eyes open. The night had stretched long, but the final chapter was still unwritten, and I wasn't walking out until it was. The MC's voice cut through the music. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we close out this beautiful evening, we have one last announcement from our happy couple." Ryan rose, straightening his jacket, Vanessa by his side. They looked like a magazine spread, perfect posture, perfect smiles, but I could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. The USB drive was gone from the table. He'd pocketed it earlier, but the way his hand kept brushing against that pocket told me it hadn't left his mind. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate with us," Ryan began. His voice was smooth, confident, but I'd known him too long not to hear the faint tremor beneath it. "Tonight has been unforgettable." I stepped forward before he could finish. "It has, hasn't it?" The microphone was on a stand just a few feet from him. I didn't wait for permission. I walked straight to it, my heels clicking against the polished floor. A hush fell over the crowd, curiosity crackling in the air. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Emily, this isn't." "It won't take long," I said, my voice steady. "I just want to thank you all for welcoming me and my boys tonight." I turned, gesturing to Liam and Noah, who were watching wide-eyed from the table. "These are Liam and Noah, my greatest joy." And I looked back at Ryan's sons. There was no gasp this time, no shock. That revelation had already made its rounds, but the tension in the room thickened as I continued. "I wasn't planning to say more," I said, "but after the conversations I've had tonight, I think it's important to be clear. When Ryan and I were married, we built something from nothing. I believed in him when no one else did, and I believed that success meant we'd both rise together." I paused, letting my gaze sweep the crowd. But sometimes success changes people. And sometimes those people forget where they came from and who stood beside them to get there. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's expression was a mask, her smile fixed in place. "I don't need anyone's pity," I said, my voice warming. "I have a good life. I have 2 beautiful boys. I've rebuilt from the ground up. But I came here tonight for one reason: to make sure my children are never erased from the story." My words landed, and I could feel the weight of them settling over the room. But I wasn't done. "Ryan," I said, turning to face him fully, "you once told me you'd give anything to be a man who made his family proud. Well, you have 2 sons watching you now. The question is, are you going to be that man?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ryan's lips parted, but no words came out. Vanessa stepped forward slightly, her voice sweet but edged. "Emily, this really isn't the time." "Oh, I think it is," I said, cutting her off, "because this is the moment your guests will remember, not the flowers or the cake. They'll remember whether you honored the truth standing in front of you." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim envelope. "And in case you think I'm here without proof, this is a copy of the birth certificates. Ryan Mitchell is the father of Liam and Noah, in writing, under oath." I held the envelope out, and for a long second no one moved. Then Ryan stepped forward, took it, and looked down at the papers inside. His face was unreadable, but his knuckles were white around the edges. I stepped back from the microphone, letting silence do the rest. Finally, Ryan looked up. "They're my sons," he said, his voice quiet but carrying through the room, "and they deserve to be acknowledged." The crowd reacted. A few claps, some nods, murmurs of approval. Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her hand tightened around his arm. I didn't stay to hear more. I turned, walked back to my boys, and took their hands. As we headed for the exit, people began to step aside, offering small smiles or nods of respect. The whispers had changed. I could feel it. I wasn't the scandal anymore. I was the woman who had walked into this room and told the truth without flinching. Just before I reached the door, I glanced back. Ryan was still watching me, something unreadable in his expression. Vanessa had already turned away, engaging a guest with a smile that was all teeth. It didn't matter. My point had been made. Outside, the cool night air hit my skin, carrying the faint scent of rain. Liam and Noah leaned into me, tired but content. "You okay, Mama?" Liam asked. I smiled. Better than okay. Because I hadn't just survived the night. I'd won. And tomorrow, when the photos and stories started to circulate, the world would know exactly who I was, and that I wasn't going anywhere. The morning after the wedding, my phone started buzzing before I'd even poured my first cup of coffee. At first I thought it was just Lena checking in, but then the messages kept coming. Texts from old friends, coworkers, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. "Emily, you're all over the news." I opened the first link with a mix of curiosity and dread. It was a glossy society page photo. Me in my midnight blue gown, Liam and Noah on either side of me, all three of us looking straight at the camera. The headline read, "Ex-wife and twin sons steal spotlight at tech mogul's wedding." I scrolled. The article was surprisingly respectful. It painted me not as a gatecrasher, but as a strong mother reclaiming her place in the story. It quoted my speech almost word for word, and the comments section was flooded with support. By the third article, I realized something. I hadn't just survived last night. I'd rewritten the narrative. Lena showed up at my apartment around noon, carrying takeout and grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "You've gone viral," she said, plopping the bag on my kitchen counter. "Everyone's talking about you. Women's groups, parenting blogs, even a couple of business podcasts. You're being called the Ballroom Phoenix." I laughed, shaking my head. "That's ridiculous." "It's perfect," she countered. "You walked into that wedding like you were rising from the ashes, and you didn't just burn them. You shined." The boys were playing on the living room floor, blissfully unaware of their new internet fame. I sat down with Lena, letting the weight of it sink in. For so long, I'd felt like I was fighting invisible battles. Last night, the fight had been public, and I'd won it without losing myself. Then, just after lunch, my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. Ryan. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" His voice was quieter than I expected. "Emily, I saw the coverage." "I figured you would," I said evenly. There was a pause. "Listen, I don't like how it all happened, but I can't change that. What I can do is make sure Liam and Noah are part of my life. Publicly, legally, whatever it takes." The words took a second to register. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll acknowledge them officially, and I'll set up a trust for their future." I didn't trust him completely, not yet, but I could hear something genuine in his tone. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was the realization that hiding from the truth had nearly destroyed his perfect image. "We'll talk," I said finally, "with lawyers present." "Fair," he replied and hung up. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even closure. But it was a start. Over the next week, the story kept growing. I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment panel. A local magazine wanted to feature me for Mother's Day. Even the twins' preschool teacher mentioned that other parents had brought it up. Through it all, I kept reminding myself, this wasn't about fame. It was about showing my boys that their mother could stand up in the face of something meant to tear her down and walk away stronger. One evening, a week after the wedding, I took Liam and Noah to the park. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold. They ran ahead, laughing, their voices carrying on the breeze. I sat on a bench, watching them chase each other around the swings, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Lena joined me, holding 2 coffees. "You know," she said, "you could disappear now. Just go back to your life, keep your head down." I shook my head. "I don't want to disappear, not anymore." She smiled. "Then what's next?" I thought about it, about the years I'd spent defining myself by my past, about the woman I'd become in the process of surviving it. "Next," I said slowly, "I think I'm going to start telling my story on my terms, because that was the real victory. Not the headlines, not Ryan's reluctant acknowledgement, but the fact that I finally understood my worth had never depended on him. When we left the park, the boys each held one of my hands, their little fingers curled around mine. Noah looked up at me and asked, "Mama, are you happy now?" I smiled down at him. I am, happier than I've been in a long time. That night, after I tucked them into bed, I stood at the window and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ryan and Vanessa were probably still spinning their own version of events. But it didn't matter. The people who mattered, the ones I loved, the ones who loved me, knew the truth. And more importantly, I knew it. I wasn't the ex-wife who'd been humiliated at her husband's wedding. I was the woman who walked in with her head high, her children by her side, and changed the story completely. And from now on, every chapter of my life would be written by me. So my friends, that's where our story comes to an end. You're still here with me right now, aren't you? If you've stayed until this moment, it means something in Emily's journey has touched your heart in its own quiet way. Maybe it's her courage to walk into the fire. Maybe it's her choice to rise instead of break. The Stoics often said, we cannot choose our circumstances, but we can choose our response. Emily chose dignity, truth, and love for her children, and in doing so, she reclaimed herself. Life will throw storms at us all, but we are not the storm. We are the sailor steering through it. If this story moved you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe so we can keep walking through these moments together. Because your story, too, deserves to be told, with strength, grace, and your head held high.